All right, we're back. I could say good morning again because it's still early, but we're moving into the semifinals of our team event here. We are going to be watching the victorious team from last round, Warfield, Powell, and Reichard, playing against their semifinals opponents. The players are looking at each other's deck lists. It looks like it's going to be... I can't read that yet, so I shouldn't have started so early on that. But anyway, Shane, we're going to be not focusing on limited this round. We're going to be starting with Legacy. We're going to see Oops All Spells against Izzet Murktide. And this is a matchup. These teams played each other yesterday evening, and we saw this matchup already. And it was won in a fairly close 3-game match by the Oops All Spells deck. No, I take that back, by the Izzet Murktide deck. Which is, I mean, we have an all-in combo deck versus deck with Daze and Force of Will. That's not a shocking result, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it certainly makes sense that the blue deck would be advantaged in that scenario. I think it's nice that you're calling this deck Izzet Murktide versus Izzet Delver, because Delver's kind of been superseded by these Modern Horizons 2 cards, even though we're seeing it referenced as a Delver deck still.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the Oops All Spells deck, I mean, it's capable of winning so quickly, but if in the opening hand Ali has those counter spells, it may be in some trouble.
Right. Okay. So now we see it's. Go ahead.
I'm just looking at this. There's no way our graphic is correct with the limited games, right?
No, that's just what hasn't been reset from the last round yet.
Okay.
But yeah, so
I thought maybe even if they started early, that would be equivalent. But we'll get that straightened out. But yeah, I know there were some people in our chat who wanted to see some Legacy, and here we are.
Yeah, so we have Dominick Paolercio, which we mispronounced earlier, Antonio Zanutto, and Rodney Bedell against Piper Powell, Kyle Reichard, and Ali Warfield, who we just saw play, and we saw these players play yesterday. So we'll see if they've learned anything from how the matches played out the first time around. But we're going to be starting on Legacy. Rodney Bedell, Oops All Spells. Now, the Oops All Spells is different than it was a few years ago because of the double-faced land cards. There actually are lands in the deck, whereas before it really didn't have any at all. Now there are some, so it has a little more staying power and it's a little mildly less aggressive. As less aggressive you can be when you're still playing 8 all-in creature win conditions that cost 3 and 4 mana. So we'll see if Warfield is able to find the tools to fight against this. We see a Force of Will in the hand in the Wasteland, and the Wasteland actually is relevant, whereas before it wouldn't have been because, again, there were no lands in the deck previously.
Yeah, the double-faced cards certainly doing some work here in this combo deck, and we also see a Pact of Negation. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I am not familiar with the Oops All Spells deck enough to say what they're exactly looking for in their opening hand, but obviously they're looking to combo, and if they have that Pact Negation backup, that could go a long way.
Yeah, and it definitely played a role. It definitely came into play yesterday in their match. So there's 2 sets of creatures. There's Balustrade Spy, I believe there's a 3-drop and a 4-drop. The 4-drop comes into play and wins the game effectively by milling the deck. The 3-drop comes into play and activates for 1 mana to win the game. So they basically both cost 4, although one is more dazable than the other.
Yeah, so you have the Spy, you have the Undercity Informer.
That's the other one, right?
They're kind of the engines of the deck. And then Thassa's Oracle is just a clean win at the end.
Yeah, the win condition has gotten much cleaner for all these kinds of decks that are self-mill with Narcomoebas and Dread Return, allowing just 1 card devoted to the win condition instead of previously where I've been 3. So we see Spirit Guide into Wild Cantor to start with. Warfield's going to give that a read, so why don't we bring it up if we have Wild Cantor available. This is a 1-mana hybrid creature that can sacrifice for any mana, and it is Summoner's Pact. Wild Cantor is the card. It is Summoner's Pactable if required. The Summoner's Pact in hand can also just generate a mana by searching for an Elvish Spirit Guide at any point. There you see the Wild
So we
Cantor.
saw a pause there from Ali on whether they wanted to Force of Will this Dark Ritual, ultimately decides to do so, and then we immediately see the Pact of Negation, Summoner's Pact.
Yeah, so Pact of Negation carrying the Force of Will, and Summoner's Pact, now we're just looking for a mana source here, I believe. There is an Elvish Spirit Guide generating 1 mana, bringing the total to 4, which is how much it takes, believe it or not, to win the game.
I mean,
and
the people wanted
done.
to see Legacy. Did they want to see more than 1 turn of Legacy? Well, you're not going to get that privilege.
No, well, I was suspicious that we'd only actually see 1 or 2 turns. Fortunately, we have another match ready to go. So while these players go to sideboarding and Allie decides how she's going to recover, she did win the match
See, and
yesterday.
look at that. A game is already over, and we're here on turn 1 of this match.
That's just like we planned this. It's a good setup. So Kyle Reichard with his turn 1 Dragon Rage Channeler versus the Graft Land. It took me a second to remember the name of the mechanic.
Yeah, that's not one you see all that often anymore.
No, and we see, so this Hardened Scales deck is full of small creatures with abilities that synergize together along with Hardened Scales and the Ozolith. And we see 3 Lightning Bolts in Kyle Reichard's hand, which are going to be either great or worthless depending on what kind of support level there are for the Hardened Scales
Kyle
deck.
read the card. Maybe we can get it on the screen for our viewers. That's Llanowar Reborn, and there's 3 of those in the deck for the Hardened Scales player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Llanowar Reborn works really well with Hardened Scales and with the Ozolith. And again, that's really what this deck is doing. Now, we don't see either one of those. Instead, we see Ingenious Smith as the first play. So 1/1 artifact, or I'm sorry, not artifact creature, but 1/1 creature that looks at the top 4 cards of your deck. If there's an artifact in those 4, you can put it in your hand. And then the first time an artifact comes into play each turn, you can put a counter on Ingenious Smith. So this is really more of an enabler than a payoff, but it does dig a little bit in the deck, and it can grow somewhat as the game goes on. And the find is, there's some glare there. I believe that's a Hammerback Walker.
So meanwhile, for Kyle's side, I mean, normally if you had a single Lightning Bolt, I don't know if you'd want to use it on this Ingenious Smith, although it will certainly gain value if left on the battlefield over the course of the game. But with 3 and primarily wanting a Dragon's Rage Channeler trigger to try to draw into some more action, I anticipate we're going to see this Lightning Bolt at end of turn.
Right. And yeah, it's easy to gloss over because it happens so fast, but I can't believe we just saw a turn 1 kill in Legacy through a Force of Will. That was amazing.
Yeah, of these 3 formats, that Legacy is my least experience, at least recently. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, things were a little different. But I had a feeling that Force of Negation in the opening hand for Rodney was going to be significant, and it certainly turned out to be the case.
Pact of Negation, yeah, I agree.
Excuse me, yes.
We're going to go ahead and go back to Legacy. Force of Negation is a card that Warfield has access to after boarding. So negation cards on both sides. Warfield with many more counters, but significant need of them, as it's unlikely. Warfield is if you're unfamiliar with how these decks can play out, well, you saw the first turn of the match. Warfield is never going to win a race. It's just not going to happen. Her pressure doesn't really matter. It's all for her. It's all about, can she find enough disruption to slow down the Oops All Spells deck, which now, while the players continue shuffling, amusing story. This morning, Rodney Bedell came into the tournament hall before it was actually open to the public, looking for his deck because he lost it last night. We didn't have it, but it turned out he found it somewhere else. As you can see, he's still playing in the event. Otherwise, his team would have been absorbing a loss in the Legacy seat. But it's really frightening. I mean, if you're going to misplace one of the decks on your team, Legacy is not the one that I would choose.
Yeah, I'd probably choose Limited, although if you go to a dealer's booth, you might have an easier time replacing a Legacy deck.
That is possible. It's
going to be close, but some of those commons in Limited might be tricky.
Yeah. On the other hand, Oops All Spells is not one of the more expensive Legacy decks, but still, it's going to cost you a pretty penny if you had to replace that on the spot.
Well, certainly glad he found it. I had an unfortunate incident that you're well familiar with, where I sat down round 1 of a GP, pulled out my deck box, and it was the wrong deck. And it wasn't until 10 minutes later, when I had essentially conceded the match because of this issue, that I realized I had another deck box in my other pocket.
Yes, I remember that.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you're watching at home, perhaps you want to put in the chat whether you can even envision the possibility, as Rodney Bedell takes a mulligan here, can you even fathom having a Magic deck box in your pocket and being unaware of it? Because, believe you me, at the time, I was absolutely shocked. I still can't. I can't believe someone could have a, I don't know, whatever the size of a deck box is and the weight of it in your pocket and just not know. Just not know. It's impossible, Shane. Impossible.
I
But you
mean,
did
maybe
it.
I knew it was there, and I still thought it was the other one. I don't know. My brain works in funny ways sometimes, but
Yeah.
it wasn't my finest moment.
No, and it has a lot of competition for that distinction. All right, so Allie Warfield here on 7, and she's got to be happy seeing this combo deck mull, as it's a deck where, I mean, it may still be able to assemble a win on 5 or 6 cards, but it's unlikely to be able to survive permission from Warfield on 5 or 6 cards. I mean, there are discard spells in the deck. There's Cabal Therapy, there's Thoughtseize, there is Pact Negation. We see one in hand, but the fewer cards, the better as far as she's concerned.
Yeah, we saw Cabal Therapy be the choice to go to the bottom there, but we'll have to wait and see if this Pact Negation ends up being relevant as well. So we see this Grafdigger's Cage. How relevant is that against this Oops All Spells deck?
Well, let me think about that for a second. If it's in play, Rodney cannot win. Okay, that's how relevant it is.
That seems pretty important. Of course, the Pact Negation can't be cast, or I'm sorry, Pact Negation. Now I'm getting my packs and my forces confused, but I did get it right. So even though Rodney had that counterspell, he's only ever going to use the Pact Negation on his combo turn.
Right.
And so despite the fact that this Grafdigger's Cage is going to be a huge problem, it's going to remain on the battlefield for now.
Yeah, there are some answers to it. I believe there's Foundation Breaker, and there may be some other alternatives, but we're saying that Warfield's disruption was more important, and her disruption isn't just in the form of blue counterspells, it is also in the form of permanents, and we see a very strong one here. Chrome Mox pitching a Narcomoeba, so Rodney has access to blue mana now, which isn't going to amount to much, but I think this was just in lieu of discarding.
Now, if you're Allie, you're really in no super big rush, but you would ideally like to get a creature on the board to try to pressure Rodney a little bit here. But as long as Allie has a number of counter spells in their hand, they're going to be very comfortable, especially with the cage in play.
Right. And this is a scenario where Dragon Ranch Channeler might deal more damage, but Ragavan's ability to exile cards from the top of the deck, in a deck where there actually are one-ofs that are relevant to the combo, Ragavan could actually end the game with one hit, for example, by just wiping out the Thassa's Oracle or the Dread Return. Rodney has a Summoner's Pact in hand, so he does have access to green mana as a one-time use at the small cost of... Okay.
And now Torpor Orb. So I mean, Rodney wasn't doing a whole lot, but he has a lot to fight through here.
Yes, he does. And
now keep in mind, he does have Force of Vigor.
Mm-hmm.
He has 4 copies of Force of Vigor to go along with that Foundation Breaker. So maybe the Torpor Orb isn't that spectacular in the sense that a single Force of Vigor can answer both. But of course, Allie, I'm sure, has some permission backup to protect that.
Okay. So Wasteland online, so even if Rodney draws one of his lands, not incentivized to play them. And Allie is just, she's just looking for a form of pressure now, as Rodney is basically locked out of the game. And now the fight is over Force of Vigor, not over win conditions, is that Rodney can't even cast them anyway.
So if you're Rodney, what are you really looking to draw here? I mean, Force of Vigor has to be step 1, I suppose, but I'm sure he knows that that's probably not going to get the job done.
Right.
We see our first land of the game for Rodney, and our first damage, really, with the 3 damage. I believe there's been a fetch land on Allie's side.
Mm-hmm. And there is a Foundation Breaker in hand, so that doesn't do anything at all. The Torpor Orb shuts off the Foundation Breaker. So really, we're just looking for...
It's almost like you...
Well...
So it can just be cast as a creature. I mean, the Evoke is shut off because of the Torpor Orb. Is that correct? And so you have a 2-mana 2/2.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we see here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and bring up Foundation Breaker if we can. But it is on the board.
I mean, Grizzly Bears probably isn't how Rodney anticipates winning this game, but
I mean, when you're playing combo decks based on creatures and you're shut down, I mean, you have to try.
well,
And
he is shut down. But does it have more value in his hand just as a green card for Force of Vigor?
that is an excellent observation, and it very well might. But he's going to try. And I mean, if she's sitting on 7 counter spells, maybe this will get there. And well, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, I give you credit for calling this deck Izzet Murktide versus Izzet Delver, even though it's Izzet Delver on our screen. Of course, it has a lot of similarities to the modern deck that's being played on their side as well.
Mm-hmm.
The Modern Horizons 2 creatures has really transformed not only Modern, but Legacy as well, and as we see the Murktide region come down.
Yeah, so that's a 6/6, much bigger than a 2/2. And Allie Warfield, no reason to stay back on defense and try and prevent attack. She's just going to race and get in there. As I said, she can't race on her own, but backed up by Graftear's Cage and Torpor Orb, this Murktide region is going to do plenty of damage. And Rodney, if he wants to efficiently use his time, should now be considering whether he wants it all for game 3 and not worried about trying to win this game, as it's just not going to happen. And we see Dominick Paolercio does take down the first game in any of the other matches for this round, as he's up 1-0 over Piper Powell.
Yeah, the limited matchup, obviously the deck list is going to be a little different for Dominick, but it's the same matchup. Gruul versus Demir there with the blue-black player. Mm-hmm. And once again, the blue-black player takes down game 1, and then Piper was able to come back team and win games 2 and 3. So we'll see what happens here. Meanwhile, Allie takes down game 2 to even up the score in that matchup. And we see a big board here for Hardened scales that looks pretty advantageous. It looks like there's a lot of action responding to a lightning bolt here on the side of Kyle.
Mm-hmm. So yes, a baseless collar, a module up at the top of the screen, and then a couple token creatures, a Ravager, and an Urza Saga construct, welding jar on the way in, all kinds of action. But this trio of lightning bolts that were in Kyle's opening hand, this is the second one being cast. We can also see not only heat in the graveyard, but these creatures, when this synergies start going, spot removal is just not going to keep up. You need sweepers, engineered explosives, force of vigor, things like that. And we're in game 1, so those cards aren't going to be present. And Antonio Zanutto is looking pretty strong, I would say. Antonio Zanutto was a judge last week in Las Vegas at the big event, and then came here instead of going home right away, and is actually playing this weekend and doing very well for himself.
Yeah, in the top 4 of this event, and his team, whether he knows it or not, has at least 1 game win in the other matchups. And that's always fun for me in team tournaments too, when sometimes you're like in the zone, right? Mm-hmm. And you're focusing as he takes down the game here, and you're really focused. It's a tight game, and then all of a sudden your teammates are like, "Dude, we won!" Like, yeah, you're off the hook, and that's always a tremendous feeling when you kind of can break free from the stranglehold that whatever the game you're focusing on. I mean, it can have a big mental impact to just have that weight lifted when you think it's down to your game, and then all of a sudden it's your side.
No, it's super comforting, and it is, yeah, definitely when you're up against the ropes and you're feeling like, oh, I'm going to lose, and then all of a sudden it doesn't matter. That's fantastic. So we see so unfortunately for us, I mean, we have 3 matches, all sideboarding at the same time. Really poor cooperation amongst the players to improve the viewing experience, but we can't have everything we ask for. Anyway, when we get back to it, we'll probably go to the Legacy match again, where Warfield will be trying to have another game like game 2, as opposed to like game 1, where she got to, I think, make 1 land drop. And
cast Force of Will.
Yeah, that's true. She did cast a Force. So, I mean, really, she got to play 2 spells. What more can you ask for? Just couldn't hold off your opponent casting 11 or whatever it would have been. The Oops All Spells deck, it's interesting that we have multiple different kind of packages that can run the same style of win condition. Oops All Spells and Cephalid Breakfast, really Cephalid Reanimator, running the exact same thing. Self-mill, Narcomoebas, Dread Return, Thassa's Oracle win the game. It's just a different support package for the deck. We've also seen other such things in the past. It's just the printing of Thassa's Oracle that I mentioned earlier. Basically, the amount of cards you had dedicated to your win condition used to be 3, and there was multiple options available, but you had 3 creatures plus the Dread Return. And now, with just Thassa's Oracle and Dread Return, you get 2 more cards to just put in your deck to be whatever you want. That may not sound like a lot, but 2 Pact of Negations or Thoughtseizes or Cabal Therapies or whatever, 2 more than you have. That's a ton. That's so much, and it really has improved the quality of these decks. Now, we're still talking about fringe decks, but Oops All Spells more competitive than it used to be, and that's why we see. I don't think Torpor Orb is an everyday sideboard card. You see it occasionally, but Grafdigger's Cage plus Torpor Orb, really not what Oops All Spells is hoping to face by any stretch. I guess they're not really hoping the opponent even gets turned.
Yeah, not only that, but I think the double face lands, as you mentioned, improved this deck significantly. And we've definitely seen it pop up a little bit more in Legacy as a result.
Now, for those of you that may be watching and we're here for Limited or for Modern, and you're seeing Legacy now, you're like, oh, so it's just turn 1 kills. That's what I've been told. I'm out of here. This is not all the format consists of. It's just what we happen to have here. We have a competitive all-in deck, and that's really, this deck has existed for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, and its kind of predecessor was like Charbelcher, which was again a competitive, well, semi-competitive all-in deck. The format does consist of a lot of different things, a lot of interaction, although really we saw interaction. It just happened quickly.
Well, yeah, in game 2 especially, we can see that, there are games that may end on turn 1 in Legacy, but if you have the tools to fight back against these decks, they are going to fold. And then we certainly saw that in the second game.
Yeah. And that is a scenario where Oops All Spells win rate in game 1 against the field is going to be much higher than it is in game 2 and 3. And that's really the kind of the hard thing. And I'm sure that Oops All Spells players know that going in. Their tournament is going to be decided by game 3s when they're going first throughout the day, no matter what matchup you're playing against, because they're going to win a lot of game 1s. The die roll, because they're going to be advantaged in game 1. They're probably going to lose game 2 going second against sideboard cards, and then they have to win game 3 going first against sideboard cards. And can they do it or not? And it looks like both players on the mulligan here. Certainly, from the Warfield seat, you know what you're facing, you know what you need, and if you don't have it, a 5-card hand with a Force of Will is better than a 7-card hand with a good aggression here.
Yeah, I think one thing that people who play a lot of Legacy have an advantage over people who are new to the format is just mulliganing in general. I think it's so important to know, especially if you know what the matchup is. If it's game 1 and you don't know, it might be a little different. But in this exact scenario, each player knows exactly what they want their opening hand to look like. Mm-hmm. And Ali likely, of course, wants some permission to protect against this Oops All Spells deck, who we saw is capable of winning as soon as the first turn.
Yeah, and I bring this up a lot in coverage, and I do enjoy the conversation of in any given matchup, if both players are on 7 versus both players are on 5, one of those players, one of the players is going to wish they're both on 5, and one player is going to wish they're both on 7. Here, I don't actually know who's going to want what scenario is ideal for, and they're both going to 5. So
yeah, and I'm not entirely surprised by this, just because again, I can't stress enough, they're looking for very specific hands,
right?
And with all the mulligan rule changes, I think mulligans are a little less costly than they used to be, and if you're looking for the right 5 cards, this is a good way to do it.
Yeah. And for Rodney, with Warfield being on 5, Force of Will becomes much more difficult to use, and Force of Negation. So he's probably, I would think, he would rather now have a Thoughtseize than a Pact of Negation. Whereas on 7-card hand, he probably wants to just jam as fast as he can and have Pact to counter a free spell. Now, in a sideboard game, having to worry about Grafdigger's Cage, for example, if Warfield gets a turn, Yeah, I think Thoughtseize is his ideal spot. Now, unfortunately for him, he's also playing Cabal Therapies, and those are not going to be as effective because Warfield has a whole variety of cards that he's not going to want to face, and there's no way to know which of them are in her, what is eventually going to be a 5-card hand. See, a Force of Negation, a Daze, and a Pyroblast, I think. So she's certainly got her choice. Wasteland going to go back.
Yeah, it looks like Allie's going to keep on 5. Looks like both players are going to keep on 5. Rodney's already made his decision. He moved Wild Cantor to the front. That might be a key piece to winning as soon as turn 1, which is exactly what we saw in the first game.
Mm-hmm. He does have a Luminosaurus and a Thoughtseize this game, so it also might just be his route to black mana. Cantor comes in and a pass of the turn, so Rodney is at her mercy. If she has a Draft Digger's Cage again, he's going to be in trouble. It's not already on the board, though, so she probably doesn't have one. I'm not even sure in this situation you even wait for the fetch land. You're just like, here's a fetch. I'm playing Draft Digger's Cage. I'll worry about the land later. But no, she fetches a Volcanic Island, and we'll see what she's got. We know there's at least a copy of Daze in her hand, as that came off the top on turn 1. And all decisions are magnified here because the players aren't going to get to make that many of them. They're going to happen. The games are compressed. Everything's going to happen in the first couple turns.
Yeah, even if you're new to Legacy, like you mentioned, and you think the games are over immediately, these early stages are just so intricate, and every decision matters.
Right. So we do have a Thoughtseize and a Black Source for Rodney. So the Cantor can stick around. Might as well get in for 1. Why not?
Send a message.
Exactly. Thoughtseize to clear the future path. And Warfield can't daze this as there is a mana source available. So show the hand of.
Okay, well, I mean, if you're Warfield, this is the type of hand you wanted, especially mulliganing to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And now Rodney gets to take his pick.
Mm-hmm. So Forced Negation, and this came up yesterday in their match. Forced Negation won't stop the kicking off the combo. It will just stop the drive return at the end. So it's not great. And we see it's not even selected here as Daze is chosen. Because once the combo is set up, then Cabal Therapies can clear the way for the actual win condition. It's kind of unusual way the Oops All Spells deck functions. Warfield draws the Expressive Iteration and is going to sit on it for a turn. Also, it might just be the card she's playing on pitching to the Force of Negation.
I believe we just drew a Cabal Therapy, which obviously is much better once you've already seen your opponent's hand.
Mm-hmm. So will Rodney just try and go off now? Because of the Daze in her hand, the Cabal Therapy doesn't contribute playing into that very well in the same turn because it is effectively using up one of your mana. So Cabal Therapy is cast here. Warfield will decide if she wants to respond. We know she doesn't have a response, but she does have a card that Rodney doesn't know about, so she can give herself a few seconds here and make him question whether there's a Brainstorm in her hand. Maybe he'll burn the Therapy off and miss. But likely it's going to resolve, and then we'll see what he chooses to name. He knows some of the relevant cards.
Well, Ali's certainly considering taking an action here.
Mm-hmm. I don't believe she has an action though, unless she. I can't see her.
Could force a negation it and leave up the Daze, perhaps.
Yeah, you're right. That could happen. I didn't even really consider that was as likely, but
well, it's
you're
a legal play.
Right.
We'll see what happens here.
You're right.
We might hardcast a Daze based on cracking the fetch land.
She could hardcast a Daze, but then, I mean, it prevents her from dying this turn, but it does mean she'll be left without the force. This Cabal Therapy will effectively be a 2-for-1, as it would then have free reign to name the Force of Negation or the Pyroblast. Warfield's definitely unsure of herself.
How good is the Pyroblast against this Oops All Spells deck? Obviously,
it can kill a Dark Amoeba before the Dread Return can go on the stack, and if Rodney only has the exactly 3 creatures and has no remaining other ones, which is, I can stress, not all that likely, but it is possible, then it could disrupt the combo in that way. I don't believe it's going to do much else. Killing the Thassa's Oracle doesn't do anything as long as there's no cards in Rodney's deck, and there are unlikely to be any cards in Rodney's deck. So I believe we just saw the Force of Negation.
We saw Force Negation pitching Daze.
Okay.
So this is interesting. Maybe because the Expressive Iteration is hidden information, she intentionally left that one in her hand to make Rodney second guess going off here.
Well, if he doesn't do it, then she could Expressive Iteration and hope to find something like a Grafdigger's Cage on her next turn, but I don't think Rodney's going to give her the chance. As we see this Dark Ritual off the Cantor, there is the creature, and the deck is going to go into the graveyard, as what happens here is the effect looks for a land drop, and double-faced cards don't count. So the whole deck is going to go to the graveyard. The Narcomoebas will come into play, and there are 4 Narcomoebas. Sometimes one could get boarded out, which would make the Pyroblast live. That did not happen. So you can see Rodney separating things out here. All these cards are in his graveyard. The Narcomoebas are going to come into play. He's just separated the relevant cards. Oh, wait, is the Pyroblast still in hand?
Yeah, so we're seeing Cabal Therapy.
Yeah, if Pyroblast kills an Narcomoeba here, there will only be 2 left, which will mean that...
Well, no, but there's a bridge from below, so we're getting bridge triggers.
Is there? Okay, there's a bridge from below. You're right. All right, well then that's not going to matter. And Pyroblast will miss. The Cabal Therapy will bring back...
That's it.
Clear the way. Drive Return brings back Thassa's Oracle. And Rodney Bedell, for the 2nd day in a row, is going to be in a position to win this match, but this time it's actually going to happen. Well, so good for him.
That shows off the power of the Oops All Spells deck getting through all those counter spells. Drawing that Cabal Therapy following the early Thoughtseize was really crucial for Rodney to have the confidence to go ahead and take it down there.
Yeah. Yeah, he went through that without having perfect information, as I believe he didn't know about the Express Veneration, right? So there was one unknown card in hand, but went for it anyway. And we move to Modern, where Antonio Zanutto is up a game, and he has the Ozolith in play. The Ozolith is a surprisingly annoying and powerful card to play against, as it does make a lot of your removal feel kind of crappy as long as there's any other creatures in play or coming into play in the future. We're going to see Murktide here, which is a powerhouse and bigger than anything in most opposing decks, but not always the case here in this matchup.
So if you joined us in our quarterfinals matchup, this is the exact same situation that the team of Kyle Piper and Allie found themselves in the quarterfinals, in the sense that all the opposing team had to do was win a single game to take down the match, and then they were able to come back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So we'll see if they can do it this time. Powell and Reichard fighting an uphill battle again. So let's see. Zanutto, if these live totals are accurate, Zanutto looking pretty strong this game, getting some commentary from Paolercio next door on his right, but Arcbound Worker not attacking into Murktide Regent most likely, but Murktide Regent not staying.
I believe there's a Spell Pierce in the hand for Kyle, but that's not going to get it done here.
Yeah, although it might be worth considering using it anyway, just to prevent a token.
Prevent the Urza's Saga construct, sure.
Yeah. But okay, path resolves. The way is clear. Arcbound Worker attacks for 3, and Antonio probably content to sit there and make an Urza's Saga token at the end of the turn. Or may already be at the point where Kyle Reichard is going to be depending on sideboard cards to help dig him out of this, as the Ozolith and Urza Saga versus an empty board 1-drops aren't going to be too useful. We just saw Murktide Regent dispatched, so we need some help here. We see Serum Visions, Lightning Bolt, maybe a Dress Down in hand, and an Unholy Heat.
Dress Down's a card that is occasionally seeing play in these Izzet Murktide decks and other places as well, sometimes in Loris decks to continuously rebuy the Dress Down.
All right, so Lightning Bolt on the Archbound Worker, and this is how things start to get out of control. As the construct is made, picks up the Archbound Worker tokens, the Ozolith kind of doubles the tokens as whenever a creature dies, the Ozolith will pick up the counters. So,
yeah,
okay.
So we see Alpine Moon taking care of this Urza Saga, but the Urza Saga already having a big impact, creating that construct and moving the Archbound Worker tokens over, or counters over.
Right. So
we do have another removal spell in hand potentially for this construct. I can't quite tell if we have Delirium for this Unholy Heat, but it is within range.
Right. With Delirium, yeah.
With Delirium, yes. Yeah, and it looks like we have Sorcery Instant Artifact. I'd be surprised if we didn't have a land, but we did see the Murktide earlier. So that might be it, just those 3 cards. Okay, now we have Fiery Outlet. So that handles that problem.
That is a land that can dump in. So that'll have to happen before the Ozolith can load up. There are several more effective cards in Zanutto's hand. We're going to see something come down here. I believe this is a Ravager and a Hangerback Walker. There's the Hangerback, which is a great place for the Ozolith tokens to end up. But Dress Down is going to be put into play, and Hangerback Walker is going to jump into the graveyard. And
well, that's a play I haven't seen yet. Dress Down in response to Hangerback Walker. Certainly impressive.
Yeah, I suppose that works. The Hangerback Walker just comes into play and can't put a counter on itself. I haven't seen that happen before either.
Not sure what the conversation is here.
I think it probably has to do with the timing on the Ozolith counters moving over to the construct.
So that's at beginning of combat. And based on the Dress Down play, yeah, he doesn't have the mana to sack the land and then Unholy Heat. So that construct gets in there for a healthy chunk of damage.
Yes, it sure does. Yeah, the Ozolith, a 1-mana legendary artifact that whenever one of your creatures dies, counters on it end up on the Ozolith and then can be redistributed during a future beginning of combat step. And you can see here how effective that is. Our Archbound Worker that had 3 counters on it effectively put 6 counters onto the construct. Now, the Alpine Moon shutting down Urza Saga is effective over the long term, and Antonio Zanutto's future power of his deck is decreased, but Kyle Reichard, we need to deal with what is currently an 8/8, and anything bigger than 6/6 is kind of difficult to deal with for this deck.
Yeah, we drew a Murktide Regent, but it's not often that Murktide Regent is not the biggest creature on the battlefield. But if it comes down here, I believe it'll only be a 4/4 if we max out on the spells available in our graveyard. And that's not going to be able to tussle with this construct.
No, and it would also turn off or just reduce the effectiveness of our Unholy Heat going forward.
So, and I don't blame Kyle for really thinking this through. Once again, his team is up against the wall here. So if Antonio wins this game, Antonio's team will move on to our finals.
So probably,
and this is the desperation mode when you're
highly unusual to see a player reveal his hand without conceding. Just this is just.
Yeah, I mean, I think he knows that he's up against the wall here and really needs to do special.
Okay. So what happened was Dominick Paolercio has defeated Piper Powell, and so
Okay, it's over.
so
It's
this
over.
yeah, so it's over. So they're just discussing what the result was likely to be in their game, and it did look like with that limited win that was possibly going to be an eventual sweep in that match, as the Hardened Scales deck was looking fairly strong in that scenario. Like, okay, my Seer Vision's into this. Can I even do anything? And yeah, probably not. You have Murktide region, whatever. My creatures are bigger. Get out of here. So if we can bring our bracket back up, we can show you where we're at. The team of Mildenstein, Collins, and Bostian defeats Hoey, Kruger, and Bernal. And we just saw Paolercio, Zanutto, and Bedell defeat Piper Powell, Kyle Reichard, and Ali Warfield. So our finals are set. It's going to be Hardened Scale versus Izzet Delver. It's going to be Oops All Spells against Boros Burn. Wow, is that correct? We have a Burn deck and Legacy. That's interesting. And then we have the two draft decks. So we've got one match left to decide which team is going to qualify for the Nerd Race Championship, who's going to get a larger set of the prize money, and then after that, we'll move on into our modern event. So action all day here today. Shane's with me for probably about 3 more hours. Then we'll bring Becky Bell back. She was here yesterday afternoon. She's delightful. I'm sure you guys will love her. Stick around all day. Don't go away. Don't even turn off Twitch chat at any point. Just stay here. You have nothing better to do. I promise you. Shane and I will be back in a few minutes.